Main Street, USA at Disneyland is the first themed land one encounters upon entering the original Magic Kingdom. Designed to resemble an idealized American town at the turn of the 20th century, roughly between 1890 and 1910, it was inspired in part by Walt Disney's childhood hometown of Marceline, Missouri, and represents the crossroads of an era: the gas lamps and the electric lamp, the horse-drawn car and autocar. Walt Disney envisioned it as everyone's hometown, the heartline of America, and stated that, for those of us who remember the carefree time it recreates, Main Street will bring back happy memories. While for younger visitors, it is an adventure in turning back the calendar to the days of their grandfather's youth. And although there are no longer any visitors to Disneyland who still have personal memories of that time, unless they're like 120 years old, Main Street does still allow guests to be transported back to that world of their grandfathers, great-grandfathers, or at the very least, Walt's youth. Main Street, USA at Disneyland evokes the essence and spirit of that turn-of-the-century era and fills many with a sense of nostalgia for a time and place they have never personally experienced. And one of the ways this evocation is so effectively accomplished is, in a similar manner to other Disney attractions, parks, and even movies, through the effective use of music and song. Stroll down Disneyland's Main Street today, and you'll hear the clip-clop of horses' hooves pulling the horse-drawn streetcar, the chug-chug of the motor of the omnibus, and the chatter of visitors and cast members. At various times throughout the day, you'll also hear songs sung or played by an assortment of musical groups, such as the Dapper Dans or the Ragtime Piano Player. But above all of those sounds and noise, there is the ever-present Main Street music loop. This continuous loop of music helps transport visitors back to that turn-of-the-century era, just as much as the building designs, the Main Street vehicles, and the various other accoutrements lining Main Street. The various musical pieces and instrumental arrangements of old popular songs help convey the feel of the early 1900s to visitors by simply allowing them to experience accurate and authentic music of that time period. Almost all of the music heard on the music loop was either composed during that turn-of-the-century period or written later for a show or movie set in that era. However, this was not always the case. When Disneyland first opened, most of the music heard in the park was provided by live musicians instead of by loops of pre-recorded music. But in the late 1960s, area-specific music began to be added to certain sections of the park. One of the first areas to have such music was Main Street, USA. However, the first music loop heard on Disneyland's Main Street was not music originating in or set during that turn-of-the-century era. Rather, it was mostly contemporary, easy-listening music. This changed, however, within a few years, as a result of the hiring of a man who would later be known as the voice of Disneyland.
Remain seated, please. Permanecer sentados, por favor.
In 1970, actor and radio announcer Jack Wagner, or maybe it's Wagner, I don't know, was hired by Disney as a production consultant and later announcer. In 1971, he compiled the first Main Street music loop to highlight turn-of-the-century era music. His original music loop ran from 1971 to 1992, with a slight adjustment in 1976, and focused on music written in or arranged in the style of the gay 90s. That's the 1890s. In 1992, this music loop was replaced with a new musical score when selections recorded for the newly opened Disneyland Paris were brought back to the California park. This new music loop replaced all but one of the songs from the previous loop, but maintained the focus on turn-of-the-century music. This second Main Street music loop lasted for another 20 years until 2012, when the current selections were introduced to Main Street. The current music loop, heard on Main Street today, kept almost half of the previous loop's songs, albeit utilizing different arrangements, and continues the tradition of connecting visitors to the idealized past that Main Street represents. So let's take a look at the actual music currently heard on Main Street today. And if you're interested in just a list of all the pieces heard on Main Street, just jump to the end of this video where I have a complete list. Overall, there are 28 different selections or pieces heard on the Main Street music loop, although one of these is a medley comprised of a variety of other songs. Of these 28 pieces of music, most were actually written during the turn-of-the-century era portrayed by Main Street. However, 10 were written after 1912. Let's take a look at these later songs first. 7 of these 10 were written well after the turn-of-the-century era for a show or movie that was set during that time period. The first of these is The Wells Fargo Wagon, a song written for the 1957 musical The Music Man. Although it was written much later, the musical is set in 1912, and thus just barely fits that turn-of-the-century era. There are also 3 songs from the musical Hello, Dolly: Put on Your Sunday Clothes, Before the Parade Passes By, and Elegance. Hello, Dolly was written in 1964, but set during the generic turn-of-the-century period. 2 songs from the Rodgers and Hammerstein musical Oklahoma can also be heard on Main Street: The Surrey with the Fringe on Top and Kansas City. This musical was written in 1943, but set in 1906. Fortuosity is the 7th and last selection that fits into this category. However, this song was written for the 1967 Disney film The Happiest Millionaire, which was set in 1916, making it a little bit more removed from the turn-of-the-century era than most of the other songs. These 7 songs that were written later for a musical set during the time of Main Street are joined by 3 other pieces of music heard on Main Street written well after the turn-of-the-century period. The first of these I want to talk about is my least favorite song currently heard on Main Street. However, it is probably the most recognizable tune to most average Disneyland visitors and likely the favorite Main Street song of many Disney fans. I'm talking about the instrumental piece Married Life from Disney Pixar's Up. This piece was written for the 2009 film and has no real connection to the time period of Main Street. The setting at the beginning of the movie can be no earlier than December of 1933, making this piece decades removed from the era Main Street is supposed to represent. I don't dislike the theme on its own, but I just feel like it's kind of out of place here. Whenever I hear it, it just kind of pulls me out of that turn-of-the-century setting. The second song of these other 3 is the popular barbershop standard Goodbye My Coney Island Baby, written in 1924. For more information on this song, see my other video, The Origins of the Hit Barbershop Song Goodbye My Coney Island Baby. For our purposes here, however, I'll just say that even though it is supposedly from 1924, this song has earlier origins than it first appears. The bridge section is actually taken from an earlier song, We All Fall, written in 1911. And the main musical theme of the rest of the song was also plagiarized, this time from the Aggie War Hymn, written for Texas A&M University in 1918. The provenance of this piece is not really at issue here, but it is simply worth pointing out that even this song has earlier origins than it at first appears, which serves to more closely connect it to the era of Main Street than its purported publication date of 1924 would indicate. The third and last piece, written well after the Main Street era, is the 1950 popular song Dearie. The theme of this song is reminiscences and nostalgia, and the lyrics directly refer to many events from about 1900 through the 1920s. As a result, this song also fits well on Main Street. All of the songs other than the 10 I just mentioned were written between 1887 and 1917. But even the 2 pieces which bookend those dates are outliers that don't tell the whole story without further explanation. The Old Timers Waltz Medley was written in 1917, but as its name suggests, was a medley comprised of 9 tunes originally written well before then. Its oldest song, Comrades, was written by a British songwriter in 1887, while the remaining 8 songs were written between 1889 and 1896. The first song in the medley, The Bowery, written in 1891, is the only song whose introductory verse and chorus are heard in this medley. Only the chorus is heard of all the other songs. Additionally, there are 2 songs heard here as part of the medley, which are played again later on in the Main Street music loop. These 2 songs are The Band Played On and The Sidewalks of New York. Again, only the chorus is heard during the medley, whereas later on the introductory verse of each song can be heard as well. It is unclear why these 2 songs are repeated, especially in the case of The Band Played On, which is played just 3 minutes later in the loop. Another interesting note is related to the song She May Have Seen Better Days. This section of the medley is, for some reason, not currently played on Main Street. In the original medley, it is heard between the songs Little Annie Rooney and The Band Played On. But now, the latter just proceeds right after the former, completely skipping She May Have Seen Better Days. I'm not sure why they cut it. The only thought I have is that in the original sheet music, the melody for this section is played by the trombone, a low brass instrument that has a deeper sound than the other melody-carrying instruments in the medley. But they could have arranged this differently, so I really don't know the reason for excluding it. Unless someone at Disneyland just doesn't like trombones. The remaining 3 songs that make up the Old Timers Waltz medley are Sweet Rosie O'Grady, Daisy Bell, and After the Ball. One final note concerning this medley consists of the fact that this selection is the only piece of music to be featured on all 3 of the Main Street music loops, starting back in 1971. She May Have Seen Better Days, however, was included in the medley played on the previous 2 loops, so again, I don't know why it was cut for this iteration. The remaining 15 songs that play on Main Street USA at Disneyland are all popular songs or instrumental pieces dating to the period between 1894 and 1912, the exact turn-of-the-century era portrayed by Main Street. While I don't want to go over each one in great detail, I would like to focus on a few here. Firstly, there is the iconic Maple Leaf Rag, written by Scott Joplin. This was one of his early works, served as the model for many subsequent ragtime compositions, and is one of the most famous of all ragtime pieces. If you start the loop at the Wells Fargo Wagon, as many recordings do, the Maple Leaf Rag starts at about the 4-minute mark. Another interesting song to mention is Put on Your Old Gray Bonnet, a 1909 Origipop song. This song is funny because the introductory verse sounds quite a lot like one of the main themes heard in the animated Disney film 101 Dalmatians, but apparently is entirely unrelated. This song can be heard right at the end of the Old Timers Waltz medley, right after the Ball. This is one of a few songs which appears to have an interlude added to the original music. When comparing the arrangements heard on Main Street to the original sheet music of the songs, there are a few pieces that seem to have a musical section added to it that's not found in the original. Many of the songs heard on Main Street are arranged so that the introductory verse is played first, followed by the chorus twice. This is a very common structure of Origipop songs. For the songs with an added interlude, it is almost always placed after the second rendition of the chorus, and then is followed by the chorus one more time. The songs which have this added interlude in addition to Put on Your Old Gray Bonnet include the Irving Berlin hit Alexander's Ragtime Band, A Hot Time in the Old Town, and one of my favorite Origipop songs, By the Light of the Silvery Moon. 2 other interesting songs to mention are instrumental pieces, Dill Pickles, a ragtime piano piece from 1906, and the 1911 Oh You Drummer. These are both more obscure pieces and were much harder to find information about. The Dill Pickles rag, heard on the loop at just about exactly the 30-minute mark, is often incorrectly labeled by some sources online as the Delirium Tremens rag. And the piece Oh You Drummer was published for band and orchestra with several drum solo sections, which are still included in the arrangement heard on Main Street. The last song I'd like to look at specifically is The Yankee Doodle Boy. This is the last song on the loop, after which it starts over with the Wells Fargo Wagon. This song has a section that sounds like the much older traditional song Yankee Doodle, and so it might seem to some like it's out of place on Main Street. But The Yankee Doodle Boy is actually a completely separate song written in 1904 by George M. Cohan that simply borrows a short musical theme from the older folk song. As a result, it does fit perfectly into the Main Street theme. Another note to mention is that while Main Street presents an idealized and sanitized version of the turn of the 20th century, there is no denying that in actuality it was a time of racism and prejudice, much of which made its way into the music of the day, including some of the songs still heard on Main Street. Now, because this racism is generally only heard in the lyrics of the song, and the versions heard on Main Street are all instrumental arrangements, you won't hear a racial slur in the Main Street music loop. However, that doesn't mean that the original versions don't feature them. One example can be found in the song Hello My Baby. This is the famous song sung by Michigan J. Frog in the classic Looney Tunes cartoon One Froggy Evening.
Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. Hello, my ragtime gal. Send me a kiss by wire. Baby, my heart's on fire. If you refuse me, honey, you lose me. Then you'll be left alone. Oh, baby, telephone and tell me I'm your own.
Now, the frog only sings the chorus, and the racial slur is found in the second verse, so he doesn't sing it either. But again, it's still there. And the music of the verse is heard on Main Street. There are a few other songs that feature similar slurs, or have the lyrics written in that stereotypical black dialect, which is a vestige of the minstrel origins of Origipop in general. Again, none of this is heard on Main Street, but it doesn't take away the fact that these songs have a racist element to them that ties Main Street USA to the real turn-of-the-century era in a more accurate way than Disney would probably like. The remaining 6 songs I have yet to mention include the following: Let Me Call You Sweetheart, Oh You Beautiful Doll, It's a Long, Long Way to Tipperary, In the Good Old Summertime, Wait Till the Sun Shines Nellie, and Meet Me in St. Louis Louis. These songs, along with the others mentioned previously, help to impart a quality to Main Street that facilitates the feeling of being transported back in time to a different world. While the songs might not be familiar to many visitors, they succeed in capturing the spirit and essence of the era and accentuate the feel and theme of Main Street. The music helps Main Street to be an important part of what makes Disneyland a land Walt Disney once described as a place of warmth and nostalgia, of illusion and color and delight. The music of Main Street, USA is an important ingredient in that Disney magic, which helps to create a believable world of dreams. And one more thing. In addition to this extensive look into the music, I have also created a Main Street songbook, which contains all of the original popular music heard on Main Street. I created it just for myself, but don't mind sharing it with others who are interested. However, there is the issue of copyright. Many of the songs are currently in the public domain, but there are some that are not. Maybe I could send out my songbook with the copyrighted songs taken out or something. We can figure it out. If you're interested, send me an email. My email address can be found in the About section of my YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.